Welcome back to the No Tracers podcast. My name is Kay, just the letter K. How's it going? Hope you're doing well. Welcome to this podcast all about urban exploration, the ins and outs of it, tips, tricks, stories, all kinds of good stuff in this podcast. So I am going to be having guests on this podcast, but before we get into those episodes, I want to go over the questions I will be asking them in this episode and answer those questions myself, so you guys get a little bit more insight as to the questions I will be asking my guests, as well as my input on those questions and why I came up with them. So this whole episode is going to be a breakdown of the upcoming episodes with guests. And if you would like to be a guest on the No Tracers podcast, if you're an urban explorer that captures what you do through photographs or video, I would love to talk to you. You can hit me up at contact@JustTheLetterK.com, or you can hit me up at no.tracers on Instagram if you would prefer. And we can set this up. I would love to talk to you and hear some of your stories. So before we get into this, I got to let you know I have a book out called No Tracers, an Urban Explorer's Diary. And that book is full of stories of my explorations all over the United States, a place in Canada, a place in Portugal, just spots all over the place. You know what I'm saying? So if you guys want to check that out and look at my high resolution photography and read some of those stories, head to JustTheLetterK.com/no tracers. There will be a link down in the description for you if you want to check it out. Also, if you are listening to this on Anchor or Spotify or Apple or whatever streaming platform you're on, there's also a video version of this on youtube.com/JustTheLetterK if you want to check it out. I compile videos from my explorations and put them over top of this audio for my podcast. So if you would like to watch some of my explorations while listening, feel free to head over to youtube.com/JustTheLetterK and look for this episode in the No Tracers podcast playlist on my channel. And you can enjoy even further. You can be more immersed into the world of exploration if you're interested. And lastly, last little bit of housekeeping for you. There are a bunch of affiliate links down in the description to Amazon products that I recommend for urban exploring, whether it be a backpack, a light, a respirator, gloves. There's all kind of stuff down in the description that I think will help you out. A solar charger, just a bunch of different things. So if you guys are interested in getting some gear, definitely check out the Amazon links in the description. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to jump into the questions that I have for my future guests, and I'll just share my stories with answering those questions. So the first question I have is, how did you get into exploring? And I actually have explained this. This is episode 1 this is in episode 1 of the podcast where I explain how I got into exploring. So I'll just briefly go over it real quick again. But if you want to listen to the full story, go listen to episode 1 of No Tracers, the podcast. And so what got me into exploring was my brothers, actually. They took me out exploring when I was younger, when I was a kid, and I kind of got hooked on exploring. And I think exploring is in our blood. I think it's something we naturally want to do. And so abandoned buildings just happen to be the thing that I love exploring. So yeah, my brothers got me into exploring. And like I said, if you want to hear the full story, go listen to episode 1. So the second question I have is, what was your first exploration? And again, in episode 1, I explained this, but my brothers and I stumbled across basically like a house in the woods, but there was no actual structure for a house. It was just like a floor plan, essentially. There was a couch, washing machine, a stove, a TV, VHS tapes on the floor, or on the ground rather, because there was no floor. It was literally just like they had set up a living room on the ground outside in the woods. It was super weird, but that was my first like abandoned anything that I ever saw, that I ever explored. And I actually ended up taking a VHS tape from that spot, and it turned out to be a porno. So that was my first time watching porn. I was like 13 or 14 when it happened. Yeah. And again, if you want to hear the full story, go listen to episode 1. But yeah, that was my first exploration that I can remember. We used to like explore the fields around our neighborhoods and like all that kind of stuff. But that was my first time exploring something abandoned. And then my first proper exploration when I got out to California, I believe was, let me think. I think it was an abandoned warehouse, actually, an abandoned army warehouse that I explored with my friend Chamo Is Dead. I met him at a photography meet, and I got to talking about how I loved exploring abandoned places and how I would love to get into that out here. And he immediately was like, oh, you got to come to this spot with me. Let's go. So first we tried to hit the Hawthorne Mall. If you don't know what the Hawthorne Mall is, I wrote a whole blog about it. I also have a full video from the inside of it. We've even filmed a music video inside of it for a cover of Lucky You by Eminem. I'm also a metal screamer, by the way, so I have music out. If you are interested, I'll put some links down in the description. I actually have an EP that should be out by the time this podcast is out, actually, called Pandemic. It was written during quarantine, so if you guys are interested in listening to some heavy metal music and or metalcore music, which is what it is, check out Pandemic by K Inagonio. I will put a link in the description. I also have a band called Chasing Satellites if you're interested in even more music. We have one EP out called Split, and I am finishing up the second EP right now, actually. Super excited about that. But anyway, we tried to get into the Hawthorne Mall. Chamo is dead, and I tried to get into the Hawthorne Mall, and we got kicked out by security. I have since obviously gone into the Hawthorne Mall. I've gotten in, and I have explored it extensively, and I love that place. I don't know if I'll go back. It's kind of sketchy, but it's a very cool spot, and it holds a special place in my heart because it's an abandoned mall, and I think abandoned malls are our future here in America, actually, because everything's going online. So super fascinating. But the next question I have is, have you been exploring during quarantine? And I explored a couple places at the very beginning of quarantine. I explored a double church, a double church. It had 2 chapels, and we got to explore it. I went with Urbex Off Limits. If you guys don't know who that is, you should check him out on Instagram, Urbex_Off Limits. He also has a YouTube channel by the same name if you want to check his stuff out. So we hit that double church, and then right after that, we tried to hit a mansion. That didn't work out. And then right after that, we went to a movie theater, an abandoned movie theater, and that was so cool. It was pitch black. It was raining at the time. Water was pouring down through the ceiling. It was absolutely super eerie, and it was so cool, and it was like pitch black in that place, aside from the holes in the ceiling that were letting light in. But yeah, that was... those were the only explorations I did during quarantine. But now that quarantine has kind of been extended for 3 more months here in California, I'm probably going to go out and explore some more because abandoned places, there's nobody in them. So you're safe from the coronavirus. So yeah, I'll probably go explore some more with Ginger Snaps, who's actually going to be our first guest on here. So you guys have that to look forward to. Ginger Snaps will be the first guest on the podcast. I also have Abandoned Nashville, Abandoned Southeast, just talking to a bunch of different people. And like I said, if you want to be on the podcast and you explore and document what you do, hit me up in my email. That's down in the description. I would love to chat with you and get you on this podcast. All right. So the next question I have is, when did photography come into play? I'd say almost immediately. When I started exploring out here in California, I was already taking photos. So, and I was vlogging. So yeah, it automatically came into play when I started exploring out here in 2016. So I've been exploring California for 4 years, which is crazy to think about, but yeah, I love it. And then my next question is favorite gear. So I did a whole episode on gear if you want to listen to that, but just to briefly go over it. Respirator. I have a 3M respirator that I got at Home Depot for a couple bucks back when I was in West Virginia. You can pick one of those up for I think like $10 to $15, super cheap. But you need a respirator to protect your lungs. The next thing I'll say is a camera. I use a Sony a7S II, a GoPro Hero 8, and a Mavic Pro drone. So those are my 3 camera gear pieces. I also have 3 lenses with me, usually a wide angle lens, a 14 millimeter. I have a zoom lens or a 24 or a 35 prime lens, just depends on what I want to do. And then I have an 85 millimeter lens, which is an art lens. So I use that for like close-ups or detailed shots, things like that. And then I've got more gear recommendations, like I said at the beginning, down in the description if you want to check those out. And then my next question is, what was your scariest exploration? I got to think about this one for a second. I've been on a couple sketchy explorations, but I think the scariest for me personally would probably be... Okay, so it's mostly circumstantial, it's mostly like a circumstantial kind of thing. I think the scariest exploration for me was actually the Downey Insane Asylum. And if you guys don't know about the Downey Insane Asylum, I'll put a blog post down in the description and a video to a YouTube link where I explored the Insane Asylum. It's really creepy in there. There's like a really dark energy in that place, and I did not like it. I didn't like it one bit. I don't know if I want to go back to that place just because the energy was so dark in there. But other than the Downey Insane Asylum, I think the scariest exploration was probably this abandoned jail that I explored with a bunch of friends of mine. There were a couple of us in there, 4 of us. So there were 4 of us on this exploration, and we went into this jail with skateboards, and we were skateboarding around. A cop showed up and was camped out waiting for us, so we had to escape out of this abandoned jail over a razor wire fence. We had to climb down this pipe on the side of the building because we couldn't get out the first floor. We had to go out the 3rd floor, I believe, 2nd or 3rd floor. It was so crazy. Super sketchy, kind of scary, but we got away and we were all good. So yeah, those are my 2 scariest explorations I've been on. All right, favorite history of a place is my next question. So my favorite history of a place I've explored is probably the abandoned Panoramico de Monsanto in Portugal. So this place is one of my favorite explorations, if not my favorite exploration. This place was a 4 or 5 story abandoned restaurant that had a giant spiral staircase and 360 degree view of all of Lisbon, or I guess maybe a 300 degree view of all of Lisbon. Maybe not 360 degrees, but regardless, you could see all of Lisbon essentially. And this place is abandoned, but it's guarded by a security guard who will let you explore. So that was super cool. So I think the abandoned Panoramico de Monsanto was my favorite exploration. And it had my favorite history, actually. So I'm now going to read from a bit of my book about the Panoramico de Monsanto. Like I said, if you guys want to check my book out, there's a link in the description. But check this out. I traveled to Portugal with my father for a week, and one afternoon I asked our tour guide, Diogo, if he'd take me to an abandoned restaurant for lunch, and he was more than happy to. This is the abandoned Panoramico de Monsanto, a restaurant built by Chavez Costa in the middle of a national park next to a military base under the protection of a very kind security guard about 30 minutes outside of Lisbon. With stunning 270-degree panoramic views of all of Lisbon and the surrounding areas, from the ocean to the mountains, this place was absolutely incredible. The graffiti seemed to fit it perfectly, and I honestly have trouble picturing the place without the graffiti. It truly adds to the character of the building by turning an unfurnished restaurant into somewhat of an art gallery. I wonder what this place really looked like when it was open, if it was ever open. I also wonder what Chavez Costa thinks of what these artists have done to bring some color back to his decaying designs. I wonder if he's been back. I would love to visit it with him. If anyone knows Chavez Costa, please tell him to find me an email, holler, or knock on my door. This was my first international exploration, and I am more than certain that there is nothing like this in America. This place is so unique and is such a beautiful, secretive location that I don't think anything in the U.S. can compete. A spiral staircase in a panoramic restaurant? How incredible. I'm so grateful for urban exploring, as it has brought me to some of the coolest places in the world. I now have friends across the globe that, at any time, I can message on any app or send them a carrier pigeon, and they'll drop everything to go explore with me and show me the best places in their town to photograph and investigate. So that's just a little snippet of what you could read in my book, No Tracers, An Urban Explorer's Diary. But the next question I have is, what was your favorite exploration, which ties back into what I just said. And then after that, the next question is, do you explore alone or with people? So I did a whole episode about should you explore alone or with people. Personally, I've done both. I prefer to explore with other people because it's safer and it's nice to have someone else there to help you create content, which is, what I'm all about, creating content. So I prefer to explore with people. And then goal places is the next question. Do you have any places you'd like to explore that you haven't yet that are on your goals list? So for me, that would be Chernobyl, Fukushima. There's an abandoned Nazi camp somewhere in Asia. That's a bunch of hotels, high-rise hotels that are all abandoned. I think they're like on an island. So I would like to go there. The abandoned Six Flags in New Orleans, the abandoned mall that Seth Lawless explored in his book Abandoned Malls or Abandoned America. I think it's Abandoned Malls of America, actually, the name of the book. But yeah, that place would be really cool. There are a couple places in the United States that I want to explore, but mostly international stuff that I would really like to see. So yeah, I do have some goal places for sure. The next question is, if you could live in one place you've explored for 1 week, which place would it be? For me, it would probably be that panoramic restaurant in Portugal, actually. I would love to stay a week there. That would be absolutely incredible. Either that or the abandoned elementary school I explored in West Virginia. It was huge. It was gigantic. I would love to stay the night there. I would love to stay a week there, but it's totally open and exposed. There's like all the windows are out. It's cold. It's probably cold there at night. But I would love to stay there. I would have to sleep with a respirator on, but I would do it for sure. And what's the farthest you've traveled to explore? Probably Greece. I explored a bunch of abandoned things in Greece, some abandoned windmills that are super touristy. I explored those in a Spider-Man suit, actually. I was climbing all around the scaffolding around these giant abandoned windmills in my Spider-Man suit, and everybody was loving it. It was great. I loved it. So that's probably the farthest I've traveled to explore so far. I'd love to do some stuff in Europe. I almost went into the catacombs last time I was in Paris, but decided not to because I didn't want to get robbed. I've heard so many horror stories about people getting robbed in the catacombs. Ugh, sounds scary. We're actually going to talk to a guy that is trying to go into the catacombs soon, and I would really, really love to talk to him. We're trying to get him on the podcast. Schedules are just not lining up, though, but I'll get him. I'll get him eventually, and he'll talk about going into the catacombs. And then my last question is, what is something you know now that you wish you knew when you started? So I ask everybody this question, regardless of the topic that we're talking about, because I just want to know the answer. I want to know what people have learned over their lives. For me, I wish I would have known earlier that you need to wear a respirator all the time. My lungs are pretty solid, I think, but over time they might be affected by what I've done over the past few years. But, in recent years, I've been very good about wearing a respirator when I go to explore abandoned places. It's just something I always have with me. It's something I always take and something I don't take for granted anymore. So, yeah, that's something I wish I knew when I started that I do know now. Respirators are very important. So if you're listening to this, trying to get into urban exploring, definitely pick up a respirator. It will save you and your life in the long run. You don't want lead paint or toxic chemicals or asbestos in your lungs. It's just going to kill you faster. So, yeah. All right, guys. So those were the questions that I have for my guests. I'm sure I will expand upon those questions. I'm sure I will make new questions, find new questions. If you have questions about urban exploring and you want to ask me, you can actually go to anchor.fm/notracers and you can leave me a voice memo. And you can ask your question there, and I will actually bring that voice memo into the podcast, and I'll address your question on the podcast at the beginning. So if you guys are interested in asking some questions, please feel free to head over to anchor.fm/notracers. And without further ado, this is the end of the podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, hit that subscribe button if you're new. If you liked it, please leave Please leave a rating and some feedback. And if you do leave a rating and feedback, send me a screenshot of it to @no.tracers on Instagram, and I will mail you a signed photo print from an abandoned place that I've explored. I've got a couple prints laying around waiting to be shipped out, and I think now is a good time to start mailing stuff again. So if you're interested in that or picking up a copy of the book, there are links in the description for you. Other than that, I will talk to you guys next week with ginger snaps on the podcast. Cool. Thanks, guys. Go out, go explore something, and remember, leave no trace.